Good morning, everyone. How you
Man,
doing? Peter, what's up? You looking good today? How are you, buddy?
what's going on? I'm doing well, man. How are you?
Dude, so excited for conference coming up. I know you are as well.
Wow,
Um,
man. Come on.
let's go. Hey, everybody, I'm just going to just spill the beans right now. I got a sneak peek of Peter Reeves' closing message for LTG conference coming up. Yes, it's amazing. Yes, you're going to want to be there. Yes, his session
Come
is
on.
worth the cost of the ticket alone. If that's all you hear,
Thanks,
just
bro.
come
You're
and
awesome.
hear my brother Peter
Bro,
Reeves, man. Give everyone a sneak peek real quick. Don't give away too much now, but because
bro,
people need to go buy tickets. But come on,
man.
it was so good, bro.
Title of the message is "Your boldness is a blessing," man. We're gonna
Come
get
on.
people encouraged and inspired as we end the conference. Man, I'm excited about it.
Yeah. And you
Yeah.
got like a whole crew from your youth ministry that are coming. I think. What are you
Oh
guys
yeah.
doing? You're doing a watch party or something,
Yeah,
and
man, we are doing a watch party, man. There's too many great people on the lineup that I couldn't get in front of my kids physically. So I'm like, boom, we're jumping on the bandwagon and we're gonna watch it and grow and process during the intermissions. We're so pumped.
yeah,
So
and that
pumped.
that's how the whole thing is structured. It's structured so
Yeah,
well for you as a youth pastor to be able to do like a
yeah.
little in-house leadership retreat
Man,
for
can't
you
wait.
and your team. It's going to be so
Yeah,
good. Tons of
yeah.
interaction on the platform. Private one-on-one prayer chat rooms, private one-on-one coaching rooms, lots of good
Awesome.
stuff. Yeah. Hey, if you're watching right now, we want to know who you are. So say good morning. Jenna, I see you out there. Good morning. Go ahead and drop your name in the chat where you're watching from. We'd love for you to be not just listening to this morning, but to be a part of the conversation. And if you need more information about the conference coming up, just go to leadthegeneration.com. But Peter, you and we got a special guest today, someone that you and I are both real excited to
Yes.
have on the live stream today, on the podcast today. Someone who has made a mark on both of our lives in different ways. Me, a little bit more up close and personal, as
Yeah.
Pastor Jeff Leake is the lead pastor at our home church. He's my pastor. And then you've been impacted by some of his books. And
Yeah.
so incredible. But let's introduce him, bring him into the chat real quick. Pastor Jeff, so glad you're with us this morning. How are you?
Woo!
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. And I know, my wife and I, we originally from Pittsburgh, but relocated back here to Pittsburgh this past summer. And we're just so excited to call Allison Park Church our home church. And so honored, Pastor Jeff, to consider you and your amazing wife our pastors now. And so our son's on staff there at you, and I'm serving along with the leadership team at Allison Park Leadership Academy. So such a blessing. Peter, real quick, just give a shout out for the one book that you mentioned to Pastor Jeff right before we started the stream, because I know it's had an
Yes.
impact on your life.
Yeah, man. I think your habits make you as a leader. And one of the habits I have in the morning is to pray. And Pastor Jeff's book, Praying with Confidence, has been a game changer for my spiritual life. Sometimes you don't know that you need some guided thoughts in prayer, man, that unlock some things in you that you didn't know were there. So it's just become a staple for my life, for my family, and pretty soon for our whole team. But Pastor Jeff, too, you've been impacted my life for a distance for a while. I went to school with Josh, and we were really good friends. So, and obviously you raised him. He's a good man. So, like you've been impacted my life for quite some time. So thank you.
That's
Thank you.
great. Well,
Excited to
Peter,
have you.
that's such an honor to hear. I mean, the first one is amazing when someone says, I love your book, but when someone says, I love your son, even better. Come on.
Right.
True. I'm old enough to totally agree with Jeff in the first person on that one right there. That is
Yes.
that's so true. So that's really good.
Yes.
So hey, this is going to be a great conversation. A bunch of you are jumping on right now. Cassie, we see you. Good morning. You're with us all the time. Lori, you're right here from the home crew at Butler campus. Let's go. So awesome. Emily, we see you out there. So good. So go ahead and if you want to jump in the chat, tell us hello. And, do us a favor. Today's conversation, I think, is going to be so important for us as leaders. And whether you are leading full-time vocationally in a church setting, if you're just leading in your home, you're leading your family, you're just your own life, you're leading a small business or a large business. Today, I asked Pastor Jeff if he would come and jump on a live stream today to talk on this topic of 7 principles of soul care. And this was a message, Pastor, that I heard you share with the APC staff a couple months ago. And as I was sitting there in staff meeting, I just thought, wow, this is so good. Was not only good for me personally, but I just felt like, boy, I want to bring this conversation to this platform here, to LTG Live. And so we're excited to jump into this. Those of you that are watching right now, click the share button. Tag a friend in the comments, because this is the type of conversation you're going to want them to be a part of. And, typically, Peter, you and I are very youth ministry specific in a lot of what we talk about on this live stream. And, in a broader sense, this is incredibly youth ministry specific, because we're talking to leaders who are leading students, and students that are also dealing with this same challenge of, how do I take care of my soul, right? So Peter, I'm gonna kick it to you, let you kind of introduce a little bit of the topic today, and then Pastor Jeff, we're gonna jump in and walk through each of these principles that you prepared for us.
Yeah, when I think about the title of this conversation today, I think it's one of those things that you don't think about until you're in crisis. Then you're like wondering, what are the strategies for me to take care of my soul? I actually just listened to a podcast this morning from NPR on the way in about how right now they're trying to figure out this very topic for public schools across the nation. Yeah. These students have experienced so much tragedy, so much division. And so I'm thinking on the way in, man, how can we take care of these kids if we aren't even sure how to take care of our soul? I'll tell you right now, my soul has been very troubled. And I'll say why, because obviously everything that's been happening in our nation, and there was a celebration of a man going to jail. And I believe in justice, but I was just, my soul was stirred, because I was like, man, I can't cheer for such a horrible thing, even if it is quote unquote whatever the nation says deserve. I was troubled. My soul's troubled right now by everything I'm hearing online. And so I just think that this is a very relevant topic for today. And I think that if you are in the middle of a soul crisis, this is important for you. And if you're like, my soul's just good, well, guess what? You're on the way, because life is tough. So let's learn how to care for our soul. Let's learn how to care for our soul. Yeah.
So good. Well, Pastor Jeff, jump in. I know you got 7 principles, and we're just going to unpack each of these for a minute, and we're going to take questions for those of you that are watching. But thanks again for being with us, and let's talk soul care.
Yeah. So, typically something like this is talked about from a person who has years on them, like me, 30 years in ministry, 30 plus years in ministry.
Wow.
And the question is, how do I sustain ministry over a long period of time? But then what you just mentioned, Peter, is the trauma of the moment that we're in. So our whole nation is enduring trauma, the trauma of division, the trauma of grief and loss, the trauma of injustice. I mean, the whole thing is going on. And so young people as well are dealing with this just as much as those who are, kind of weathering the storms of ministry. And then you said, as youth pastors, you're trying to minister to yourself as well as everybody else. And the first principle really is managing your thoughts. It's really all about determining how to reframe what's going on in your world from a biblical perspective, because we tend to gravitate towards our beliefs. Whatever we believe about life or ourselves or the situation we're in will either reinforce health within us or will take us into a very unhealthy place.
Yeah.
And even though there are things that are happening around us that we have no control over, what we do have control over is what we believe. And we want to filter it all through a biblical framework so that we can see it from God's perspective, which then helps us to get to a better place.
That's so good. Yeah. So double click on that for me just a second, Pastor Jeff. Like, what are some practical tips that you would suggest for us as we're endeavoring to manage our thoughts? Because I think for me personally, and probably this is true for a lot of leaders listening today, this is hard. Like, it's one thing to say manage your thoughts. It's another thing to actually be somewhat successful in doing it. What are some strategies and tips that have worked really well for you?
Yeah, so I think there are the go-to promises that I come back to all the time. My life verse, Philippians 1:6, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. So what God starts in you, he finishes. So I when the whole world is spinning, I go back to that and I grab that and I say, okay, my life is in the hands of God. There's a whole lot of trauma going on in the world, but I know I can trust this. What he started in me, he's going to complete. I'm not at the mercy of everything going on in the world because I have a Father in heaven who cares for me and he loves me. Okay, so that's a place where we might start. Or you might go to a verse like, Jeremiah 29, I know the plans I have for you. Or, something like Romans 8:28. We know that in all things he works for the good of those who love him. But then I think the other thing is we need to take the time to feel the pain of what's happening in our world and to seek truth that surrounds that particular place. So there is a lot of injustice happening in the world. And this is where we need to go to God and say, God, how do I look at this? How do I trust you to be the just judge of the earth that I can rely upon? And, I think of James chapter 2, it talks about mercy triumphs over judgment. So there is a victory that comes when I forgive. But then there also has to be a confidence in knowing that I can appeal to the judge of heaven and know that he has my back. And so I think there is, with every point of pain, there is a truth that helps us to think properly about it. And oftentimes when the pain is deep, especially if you've experienced personal trauma or loss, it might take some time to dig around the scriptures and grab hold of some things. And actually, Peter, you mentioned the book, Praying with Confidence. What I sought to do in that book was teach people how to pray biblical prayers so that even in your prayer life, you're aiming certain biblical truths. It's not just you offering your heart's request to God. You're actually praying God's promises and God's truth, which is a part of what helps us reframe our thinking on some things.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. I think especially even with that book, I'm a pastor. I know how to pray, but the language that you gave to me in that book for certain seasons, and it's crazy how that as you're going through the 31 prayers, it lines up. Oh, you're like, wow, how did he know on this day? I'd be going through this, but it was so good for me, and it still is, because you don't even realize how you-centered your prayers are in framing your thoughts. And that was the biggest awakening to me that was worth the price of the book. Was, man, my prayers are so me-centered, and it felt weird. I'll be honest, for the first 31 days when I started getting all my thoughts on him, and then my thoughts became incredibly healthy because I was praying his promises. So I agree with you. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, so I think we start there. A second thing is, second principle here is to steward your energy. So when you're going through trauma or you've been through a heavy season in your life, it's important to know how to let your body and soul catch up. The principle of Sabbath is really important, where you take a day and you don't keep on pressing forward. You let yourself rest. You let your soul recover. And, I think that when we don't do that and we just keep on going through all the grief and everything, there can be just we get to a place where we feel like we're going to lose our mind, or we have a nervous breakdown, or we're just overcome by anxiety. And so I think it's important to understand that it's okay to take a break and to rest and to do things that replenish you. You don't have to think about the problems in your life, the problems in your ministry, the problems in your family, the problems in your world 24/7. It is okay to unplug and to manage the pace and the energy that you're expending all the time.
Jeff, I was coaching a youth pastor the other day, and typically when we talk about this, like manage your energy, we tend to be real practical, like take a day off or adjust your rhythm or whatever. And I ended up having a very different kind of conversation with this young man, because he was expressing to me that he actually felt guilty when he took time off. Yeah. And so I wonder if you could unpack that side of it for just a minute. Like what is it that we're wrestling with as a leader? It's not that we're not smart enough to know how to take a break, turn the phone off, not answer the text message. I think sometimes it's more of an emotional thing for us, where we're either addicted to work, or maybe a part of our identity is finding itself in some form of achievement through our work. Can you unpack that side of it for just a second?
Yeah. So the most important thing you steward in your ministry is you, because if you aren't taken care of well, then you're not going to last for the season of calling that God has on your life. So we lead ourselves first. And then second, when you take time off, you're basically declaring your faith. You're saying, God, you're big enough to take care of this ministry.
Yes.
I'm not the Messiah. It doesn't all rise and fall on me. God, this is your ministry, and I put it back in your hands, and I'm just here to serve you. And I think that's what brings us to a place of health.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that phrase. When you take time off, you're declaring your faith. I mean, oh gosh, that's so good. I need to remember that. And if my wife is listening right now, she's going to be saying that to me. Peter,
no,
go ahead.
I don't mean to go on a little tangent, but like this has been something that the Lord's been sharing with me for a minute, Pastor Jeff and Aaron, like been thinking about like what God does when we take time off. Not just that, but when we sleep. You know what I mean? Like 4 different instances in scripture. Like one, like God pulled out the best parts of Adam when he was asleep, right? In Eve. It says while the Israelites were sleeping, the Lord was rolling back the waters, right? Like all the heavy lifting was done while people were resting. I think about Jesus in the bottom of the boat, right? The storm's raging. He's sleeping. And I feel like if the disciples would have came and laid next to him, they would have been all right in that moment. He still would have spoken to the storm. I think about Peter trapped in between 2 guards. It says that he's about to be tried the next day and he fell asleep and then his chains came off. I think rest is a solution, extremely helpful for a lot of people. So I love that when you take time, you're declaring your faith. I think it's true.
Yo, everybody, that last 30 seconds from Peter, that's Peter at like 10%. I'm just saying, wait until you hear the last session of the conference, right? Sorry, shameless plug there. So
I could feel the preach coming on, honestly.
Pastor, back to you. We got seven principles. What's the next one?
Yeah, okay. The next one would be determine your schedule and your pace. So it's one thing to take a rest when you feel fatigued. And it's another thing to schedule it in, right? To look at, am I doing too much? Is there too much on my plate? I always have to filter through. There's a lot of things that I can do, but there's only some things I'm called to do. And knowing what I'm called to do should be the filter through which I determine how I plan my life. And look, if you don't plan your schedule, someone else will plan it for you. And so it's important for you to look ahead, know what you're called to do, and make some of those decisions. And as you do that, another principle is to focus on relationships, which is the key relationships in your life should be a part of that plan, right? So you have to think, okay, my spouse, my kids, the people in my life that I'm accountable to, my leaders. As a youth pastor, I think it's really important that you pour into leaders. You're reproducing yourself in others. So all of that has to have a rhythm to it. And I think that putting your relationships on your schedule is really important to making them a priority. And when your relationships are good, when your primary relationships are good, your world is pretty good.
Yeah.
Right. If your ministry is, soaring and you have all kinds of great results, but your relational world is falling apart, you'll feel very empty. And so I think that's a very important thing to keep in focus is those key relationships.
That's so good. I think you're really inspiring some people today, Pastor Jeff, because, Lori's saying, hey, I may need to declare my faith more often. I'm like, yeah, and Cassie's like, I heard you. I'm going to go take a nap. So
it's 8 a.m.
It's 8 a.m. We're already talking about taking naps. We haven't even gotten through our second cup of coffee yet. And we're already oh, so good. Yeah. So Peter, jump in from maybe your perspective on what Pastor's talking about, managing relationships.
Yeah, well, managing relationships. I mean, I love what you said about putting it on our calendar. And I guess this is kind of a crazy question, but like how much time and like where does it fit best for you to put those relationships? Like, are you putting time right like in the middle of the day, like, hey, once I'm done this, I'm going to go take my wife to lunch, or is it more like, hey, I know I'm leaving at this time? Like, how do you what are your boundaries for that? And I guess a lot of leaders are asking that question because I was just talking to a group of youth pastors that were like, man, I need to develop breaks in my day because I just want to schedule things from back to back to back and I have no margin. So would you maybe talk about margin and boundaries?
Yeah, I think what you just said is all of the above. Yes, it's on my calendar. Yes, I take my wife out on a date every Friday. But, how much time is really determined on who you're married to.
Wait, I feel this conversation might shift to marriage counseling, and Pastor, I just want to say, Peter and I are so ready. Just go right ahead.
Yes, man, we're ready.
So I think the question is, what I need to ask my wife is, I need to say to Melody, how much time do we need right now? How much time do you need right now? Because there's different times and seasons that you go through in your married life. But, I think this is me personally now, what I'm going to tell you. I like to get up really early, start my day really early, and end early. So I will start to work out, exercise like 3:00 in the afternoon. I'm unplugging by 3:00. So I start real early. I may get up and start my day, start like 6:30, 7:00. I'm moving because it's quiet then. There's less distractions then. I get way more done then. When I get to the afternoon, I don't know about you, but I lose a little bit of focus, and I can spend 2 hours doing what shouldn't take me 2 hours to do just because I'm mentally fatigued. So I pull out, I take a little bit of a break, and then I'm ready for dinner and time with family by the time I go home. And if I get into good rhythms that way, by the way, I think one of the most important things you can do for the rhythm of your life is to get up at the same time every day. There is something that triggers the chemistry in your body that if you're up at the same time every day, you go to bed at the same time, you get up at the same time, you're going to have a better rhythm to your life. I know in the youth ministry world, that is a really challenging thing because a lot of times students, you can really spend a lot of good time with them playing Fortnite or whatever the game of choice is at midnight, right? And so there can be a little bit of a challenge with that, but getting into healthy rhythms is, I think, an important part of that as well.
Can you unpack a little bit more for us, Pastor? You made a comment, and a couple of people were commenting on this in the chat about aligning your life and the priorities of your life with what you're called to do, right? And so, like, the verbiage I feel like I've used over the last maybe year or so of my life is like, find your lane, Aaron. Like, find your lane and run in that lane, and stop comparing the lane you're running in with the lane that someone else is, that God has gifted them to run in. And there's so much value in that. And I think social media really has just exposed in our heart as leaders the propensity that we have to compare ourselves with other people, right? It's always been there. That's always been an issue of our heart. Social media has just allowed us to do it much more easily, I should say. And so just unpack that, double click on that thought a little bit more for us. I think it's so helpful, just knowing what we're called to do and staying in that lane.
Yeah. So early on in my life, and I think this is probably true for you all as well, you don't know what you're called to do. So you try a lot of things, but over time it narrows, so now I've been at it long enough. It's narrowed and narrowed. And there's some things that I feel burdened and assigned to do. And then there's some things that I know God has just kissed. Like when I'm involved in the church planting realm, God has kissed that area of my life. And I help a lot of church planters. So I pretty much say yes to anything that comes my way that's in the church planting stream, because there's a kiss of God on my life. There's other things that I'm like, okay, I'm pretty good at. I could probably do that too. But if I say yes to everything, even the good things that may not necessarily be the best things, then I end up cluttered. So knowing what God is kissing in your life, there is a sweet spot for you where when Peter gets to preaching, there's a kiss on it, right? So he should preach as often as possible because there's something on his life with that. And I think knowing where God has blessed you and kissed you is really an important thing.
Man, that is so good. I think that answers the question that pretty much all youth pastors are asking. What am I supposed to be doing? Whatever you feel like the Lord has kissed in your life, go do that. No, man, that's huge. Thank you.
That's so good.
Wow.
So good. All right, you got a couple more principles for soul care, Pastor. So kick it back to you.
Okay, so this one gets a little intense, and that is you got to be aware of your vulnerabilities. So soul care is somewhat about staying out of the ditches that can be sidelining your life. And there was a study I saw by Francis Chan that indicated that 70 to 80% of the leaders that were surveyed, these are like lead pastors, CEO types, 70 to 80% of them said that they did not have a relationship where they were safe to be 100% transparent. So a lot of leaders fall into the trap of not being in any kind of relationship where they're accountable, where they can be totally honest, where it's confidential and where it's safe. And therefore, any struggle remains a secret. And when you're struggling in secret and you feel tempted to go into some place that isn't healthy for your spiritual life or your soul, and you don't have anybody that you can go to and talk to about it, that is not a healthy place to be. So you got to have a friend, someone that is not impressed with you, but someone that you can trust, someone that's going to ask you the hard questions, and that when you're going through a temptation or a struggle, or you've had a moment where you failed in some area, where you have someone you can talk to about it, so that you can manage those temptations. Because when you get tired, when your soul is fatigued, that's when the devil leverages that against you. And the way that we deal with that moment of I guess vulnerability is to have a strategy for it. And the best strategy is to have a relationship. You know, James 5:16, confess your sins to one another, pray for each other so that you can be healed. So everybody needs somebody in their life that is going to be a safe spot for you to deal with those things.
I love what you said. I'll just put it up there on the screen. Find friends that you trust, but friends that are not impressed with you. And I think we all want the first one really, really badly. Like, obviously we all want that. We want people that we can trust, but it's a little intimidating sometimes to think like, oh, I need some people that really, genuinely speaking, are not so impressed with me that they're not afraid to be completely honest with me and tell me, hey, Aaron, here's a blind spot in your life. Here's something that maybe you're not seeing. So I don't know, Peter, jump in. You got a thought or question, but boy, that just jumped out at me.
Yeah, I think that is very exposing, the topic of vulnerability for leaders. And it just made me think about, just the fear that exists in a lot of leaders, that they feel like they can't be honest and open and vulnerable with people or anyone like that. That's crazy, because it says that perfect love casts out fear, which means that fear casts out love. So it's not just a point of them not feeling, safe and feeling loved. It's that they're full of fear. And I understand that. I understand that as a leader. And I think you're right. I think the solution is the right relationship. So how do you find those people?
Well, they're rare. Honestly, I mean, I have one friend in my life that I've been friends with for 30 some years, and he is not afraid to say to me, hey, I know you've been going through a lot. How you doing? How's your thought life? Are you dealing with anything tempting? Are you managing yourself well? Like that's really important. But I don't have 10 of those friends. I have really just one or two. So you have to be intentional about it. You got to seek it out, but you can't force it, because I've tried to arrange accountability for people on my staff before. You be accountable to so-and-so and so-and-so. You be forced accountability does not work. Then it becomes fake reporting. You're like, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. No problems. Right. And so everybody's managing their image. So you have to seek this out until you find it. Work at it until you find it. No one can assign it to you. It has to be cultivated by your relationships. A lot of times youth pastors find this in another youth pastor at another place, right? It probably shouldn't be somebody who supervises you, because there's a fear in that. Seriously. But because there's a fear in that, like, if I confess this temptation, could I lose my job? You don't want that there. But so you need safety. But then you also need someone that's going to hold you to a certain standard, that's going to say to you, hey, look, you really need to take some time off and get some counseling or process this, because this isn't good, right? So there's that balance of someone who's mature enough to speak truth into your life, but not going to end your whole world if you say something that discloses a struggle that you're having.
That's so encouraging. I think in particular it's encouraging to hear. And I don't know, maybe this sounds weird, but Pastor, you've been in ministry for 30 plus years, and you're saying, hey, I don't have 10 friends like that. I have a hand. If I can count on one hand how many have that way. Yet you've also been incredibly intentional about cultivating that relationship. So to me, that's encouraging, because I think sometimes we feel like, oh yeah, I got to have an army of people like that, or a plethora of friends like that in my life. And so it's encouraging to hear you say, no, just work at it, be intentional. You might only have one or two, but that's okay. That's really all that you're going to need in order to help you manage this part of soul care. Let's move on to your next principle here. You got a couple more left, and they're all of this is so good, but I want to make sure we get through all of them.
Okay, so the one that ties into this is you got to process your pain. So if you have experienced trauma, you have to do something to deal with it. You can't just push past. So, a number of years ago, one of my kids, they were getting ready to deliver one of my grandchildren. Okay. And when the baby was born, the baby was stillborn. Mm-hmm. So it was so traumatic. It was so impacting. I grieved in that moment like I had never grieved before. And I remember going out for a run, and I was running around a lake that we have here in our area. And about halfway through, I couldn't go on. I had no strength left in my soul, and I had to stop running. And I laid on the grass and sobbed because there's just some points when you're grieving or you're hurt, you've been criticized, you've been offended, you've been attacked, you've experienced loss, the world is falling apart, you're experiencing the trauma very personally. You need to stop to deal with it. Talk to somebody. I just want to say this. I think it's important for maybe younger leaders to hear me say this as a pastor of a church. I have personally gone to counseling. There is nothing wrong with going to a counselor and sitting down to process your pain. In fact, finding somebody that you can unload on and talk to when you're dealing with things, I think is really important. And so, having a good friend you can talk to, maybe getting a coach in ministry or leadership to talk to, going to a counselor, writing in your journal, reflecting, taking some time off to reflect on the pain that you've gone through. Your pain will eventually catch up with you. You will either pay attention to it, or one day it will grab you and force you to pay attention to it because of a health issue or some other crisis that emerges in your life. So you have to process the pain of your life, or else eventually it will make it impossible for you to function. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, so good. Just comment here from Karis, who's actually a student of Julie and I's from our youth ministry, one of our spiritual kids, and trauma-focused social worker here. Everything you're talking about is not only biblical, but also has data to back it up. Each is so important in self-care. So yeah, absolutely. Peter, what are you seeing from your perspective? Full-time youth ministry, still watching kids go through so much pain this generation, and now in a whole nother layer of it over the last year. How are you seeing students process this? How are you helping students process this?
Yeah, I think I've been working on this talk because I think it's so true. Even if it's contrary to what you want to hear, that the only way to get to someone's heart is to hear them, right? That's the core word of the word heart, is hear. And listening to students without trying to fix them is part of the processing the pain. I mean, leaders as well. Like, I have a lot of friends that just call me just to say, hey, I don't understand. And they just talk, and then they go, wait, I'm rambling. And I'm like, that's fine. That's okay. Not trying to fix people, but also not allowing them to stay for too long, just where they feel the pain and they don't want to move on, just walking with them. I think that's been kind of the challenge of the season is, being an ear to people, and just being an ear has been difficult. And I think too, like, as a leader, it is really important to process your pain, because how can you help anyone when you're carrying so much? Now, I'm carrying my own stuff, and then I got to come in here and carry what other people are putting on me as well. Like, I better have a process to deal with this. So I think this is really helpful. Very helpful.
Jeff, why do you think so many leaders struggle? I've heard, that's not the first time I've heard you say in this setting or in settings with APC staff, say something to the effect of, it's okay, you should go see a counselor, right? And so I'm just wondering, from your experience in ministry and a lot of the leaders that you rub shoulders with across the nation, why do we struggle with this so much? Is this just an ego thing? Is this just a savior complex thing, that we as leaders feel like we can't have those kind of relationships with a therapist or a counselor and process things like that?
Yeah, I think there's a certain false expectation that says, you're the leader, you should have it all together. And if you don't have it all together, maybe you shouldn't be the leader. And I think the fact of the matter is none of us have it all together.
Facts.
And we have to be okay with admitting, okay, there's a certain standard with which I have to have it together, or else I'm not healthy enough to do ministry. Okay. But none of us is perfect. None of us has, and really honestly, when we're talking about pain or even temptation, neither being in pain or having temptation is wrong. Right? So learning how to understand, this is not wrong that I feel these things. It's just a part of being who I am and the leader. So I think part of what we do when we lead is we show people how to handle life when we're tempted or traumatized, that we process it. Now, this is a delicate thing because you can't go broadcast your trauma or your temptation in the middle of it.
Right.
Like youth pastors don't get up and say, by the way, I was really struggling last night with, whatever, fill it in. Please pray for me. I'm going to a counselor today. That is probably going to really shake up everybody's world. But you can talk about the patterns, right? Or you can say 10 years ago, I struggled with this and here's how I handled it. So the present pain or struggle you're having has to be dealt with in confidence and in the proper places. But then modeling humility that says, I have walked through this too. Here's how I've handled it when I walked through it. And it's been really important for me. This is how you should handle it too. That's actually good leadership, right? To tell people how you've handled things prior. And so I think that's the right balance, right?
Yeah. So good. All right. We got one more, right?
Yep.
One more.
The final one is probably a good balance to the temptation thing. And that is a lot of times we can become sin focused when it comes to temptation. And I think what we have to do is become focused upon that which we really know we value. So the last one is to direct your affections. And the basic idea is what Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You actually can influence your passions by what you pour into. So if I want to live a pure life, my best strategy is to pursue my wife with everything in my heart and to make her feel that she is the most important thing in the world to me, because I benefit from that. I grow in affection for Melody the more I pour my life into her, because my affections are influenced by what I pour into. Same thing in my relationship with God. If I pour into my time in prayer and I spend time in worship, my affections will be filled with joy and peace and the strength that comes from being in his presence, which is a much better weapon than just managing to stay out of the ditch of sin, right? It says in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 10, the joy of the Lord is your strength. And the word strength there means like a walled city. So the more you walk in joy, the more you're protected from temptation, because when you're empty, that's when you're vulnerable. But when you're full, that's when you're strong. So if you're pursuing the right things with all your heart, Jesus said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after the right things, righteousness, for they will be satisfied. And so you can actually direct the passions of your life by what you pour into, what you invest in. And I think that may be one of the most important things we do, is to make sure our life is aimed at investing in the right kinds of things that fuel us and strengthen us.
Love it.
Yeah. So my question is, like, for you, what does that look like practically? Like, I know you talked about it a little bit. Like, you're like, man, with my relationship with Jesus, I'm making sure I'm praying. With my relationship with my wife, I'm making sure I'm pursuing it. Maybe speak to about like with your kids. What does that look like? Are you just spending more time with your kids and more time with your grandkids? What does that look like?
Yeah. So with my kids, I made sure that there was, so for a little while we homeschooled specifically so that I could spend that day off fully with them. That was for the primary reason, because on weekends that I could spend that whole day with them. But then I coached my kids, every one of my kids, I coached them in community basketball. I found ways to overlap with their life. I'm not a video game person. I'm not from that generation, but when they were younger, I found the one game I was good at, Mario Kart. Nintendo 64. I was unbeatable. I would sit and play Mario Kart for hours with them because that's where they wanted to be. So I got into their space rather than making them come into my space. I got into their space and I spent time with them on their terms. And I think those kinds of moments were really important.
Yeah, that's a question from a new dad. Can you tell?
What I heard from an older, more experienced dad was a little bit of trash talk about Mario Kart. So
I didn't hear that. I heard that too.
I don't know if any of the Leak boys are out there listening right now, but I feel like your dad's calling you out right now. So.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, getting into their world and being where they want to be. It's easy to build up your affections in that moment where they want to be present. So I love that.
Yeah. I love this comment here from Brandon. It's easier to get a child to give up something if you're offering something more valuable. I want to give up sin in my life because he first loved me and is more valuable to me. That's so true.
Yeah.
Brandon, that's what I often think about when the verse from Nehemiah that Pastor just quoted, the joy of the Lord is our strength. You know, I once heard, I think it was actually John Piper, I was reading an article, and he said that the joy of the Lord is one of your best defenses against temptation.
Yeah.
Because when you possess joy, when temptation presents itself, temptation doesn't look that great now because you possess something that's better. You know, you already have something better. And typically the way temptation works is it tries to convince you that what it's offering is better than what you already have. And so possessing joy really is that strong boundary, that fence, that stronghold that you talked about. So that's so good.
No, it is. Yeah. I was going to say this point, managing your affections, makes me think of a new life verse I'm trying to apply. It's Job 29:4. Job said, when I was in my prime, the friendship of the Lord was felt in my home. And I think as a leader, like that, you know, when you're in your prime, when you're at your absolute best and your ministry's flourishing, what's the presence of the Lord like in your home? You know what I mean? And I think when you manage your affections really well, that can be evident. When you're in your prime, the friendship of the Lord is there. It's felt. It's tangible. So I love that so much.
Yeah. Pastor, this has been so good. All 7 principles, managing soul care. Any kind of closing thoughts you have, or any other thing popping around in your head that you're like, oh, I wish I had said that at that point?
Yeah. So here's the reality. No one can manage your soul but you. If you don't do this, no one will do it for you. This is something only you can do. Even God won't do this for you. He will help you with it, but you have to take responsibility for it. And so, and if you're going through a time that you feel like is unhealthy, you can become healthy again. It isn't hopeless. Don't give up. Don't quit. Just get started, and God will give you grace for it.
That's so good. And I think such an important reminder for us. I'm the only one that can manage this soul, right? It's God can help me, but it's me and not my wife, you know, not my accountability partner, not my lead pastor. You know, it's so funny. I don't know why I'm even thinking about this, but I remember my first couple years doing youth ministry when I was at GT Church in Reading, and that I had so many, as a young leader, I had so many expectations for how my pastor was going to help me manage all, all of this, and it took me a couple of years to kind of grow through that and realize, like, none of that is his responsibility. That's on me. Like, that's my job to learn how to manage this thought life, manage these affections, manage, taking care of my soul. That's so good. Peter, any closing thoughts from you?
No, thank you so much, Pastor Jeff. This was so good. It's one of those talks that you're like, man, yeah, I feel like I'm going to apply that, and we're going to have to come back and watch it again. Like, yep, I should have done that. That could have saved me. That would have helped me right there. So thank you. Hey, praying with confidence, number 2, coming soon.
I'm working on praying with confidence for your family.
Oh. Yeah. Dude, that would be so good, because the book that I used to pray for my kids is Praying Circles Around Your Kids from Mark Batterson. But I like your style, so I will be picking that up. Pre-order coming.
Peter wants you to, you already wrote Praying with Confidence. Peter wants you to now write Praying with More Confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
And then after that, Praying with the Most Confidence. Right. So we're just going to keep on.
Hey, I'll carry the book on tour, Pastor Jeff. Don't even worry.
Let's go. So good. Well, hey, Pastor Jeff, thanks so much. Such an honor. And we really appreciate you jumping in and hanging out with us this morning. Those of you that have been a part of this live stream, you may go ahead, just drop some love in the chat for Pastor and for this great word. If you're listening back on the podcast or on the YouTube channel, thanks for joining us. And Pastor, thanks for being with us today. Hey, we just want to mention one more time, we're just a couple weeks out from the biggest event of the year for Lead the Gen family. It's our conference, online conference. It's May the 7th. And the 8th, it's online. It's perfect for a leadership retreat for you and your team. So as we're walking out of the stream here, we'll show you a quick video. And thanks for joining us today.